The war had lasted for more than a decade. The sci-fi empire, a brutal alien race, had destroyed countless planets. Their advanced technology made them unstoppable. Every species that fought against them had been wiped out. Now, only one enemy remained: humans. The sci-fi had expected an easy victory. They saw humans as weak, as nothing more than primitive creatures who relied on outdated weapons and foolish bravery. But today, something was different. The Sci-fi Dreadfleet, an army of 30 warships, each larger than a city, floated in the darkness of space. Their target, the last human stronghold. Inside the Sci-fi command ship, High Warlord Xorvath watched the battlefield from his throne. His glowing red eyes were filled with amusement. "The humans are fools," he growled. "They should have surrendered." His second-in-command, General Yaxtor, let out a deep chuckle. "Perhaps they enjoy watching their planets burn." Xorvath leaned forward. "Begin the attack." The Sci-fi fleet unleashed destruction. Plasma cannons, torpedoes, and energy beams filled space with deadly fire. The human ships tried to dodge, but they were outnumbered. One by one, their ships exploded. Inside the human flagship Valkyrie, Commander Ryan Carter gripped the edge of his control panel. Sweat dripped down his forehead. His fleet was losing. "Captain, our defenses are failing," a soldier shouted. Ryan's heart pounded. The Sci-fi were too strong. Humanity was about to be wiped out. Then, a voice echoed through the ship's speakers. "This is Dr. Ilias Carter. It's time." Ryan took a deep breath. This was their last hope. "Deploy the package," he ordered. From the Valkyrie's lower deck, a small metal object was launched into space. It wasn't a bomb. It wasn't a missile. It was just a bullet. The Sci-fi command ship detected the launch. Xorvath frowned. "What is that?" A single bullet, glowing with a strange blue light, moved slowly toward the Sci-fi fleet. The alien warlords laughed. "They have lost their minds." General Yaxtor roared. "One tiny bullet against our fleet." The entire Sci-fi fleet watched in amusement as the bullet floated in space. Then, something impossible happened. The bullet changed direction. It was moving on its own. The bullet flew toward the nearest Sci-fi warship. The ship's automatic defenses activated. Laser turrets locked onto the bullet and fired a direct hit. The bullet should have been destroyed, but it wasn't. Instead, it dodged. Not just once, not just by luck. It weaved through the fire, changing speed, twisting in ways that made no sense. The Sci-fi officers stared in shock. "What is this?" Xorvath growled. The bullet reached the Sci-fi warship's hull. It hovered for just a second. Then, it sank inside like it was being absorbed. Boom! The massive warship exploded from the inside, tearing apart like paper. Silence filled the Sci-fi command center. One bullet had destroyed an entire warship. Before the Sci-fi could react, more bullets appeared. Tiny, glowing bullets, hundreds of them, shot through space, dodging every attack, searching for targets. They weren't just bullets. They weren't just weapons. They were alive. One by one, the bullets tore through the Sci-fi fleet. No shield could stop them. No weapon could destroy them. Every time the Sci-fi tried to fight back, the bullets adapted, evolved, and became faster. Inside the human flagship, Commander Ryan watched the chaos unfold. Dr. Ilias Carter's voice came through the speaker. "The living bullets are working." Ryan exhaled. "Let's hope we can control them." Back on the Sci-fi command ship, High Warlord Xorvath clenched his fists. For the first time in his life, he felt fear. "This is not possible," he whispered. But it was real, and the nightmare was just beginning. The Sci-fi fleet was in chaos. The once mighty warships, feared across the galaxy, were now hunted. Hundreds of living bullets zipped through space, moving like intelligent creatures. They dodged plasma beams, danced through torpedo fire, and struck with deadly precision. The Cipher couldn't understand what was happening. Weapons weren't supposed to think. Inside the command ship, High Warlord Exorvath slammed his massive fist onto the control panel. His sharp teeth bared in frustration as another one of his ships exploded in the distance. This is impossible," he roared. His second-in-command, General Yaxtor, had lost all arrogance. His voice shook. "Warlord, we need to retreat." Exorvath spun around, his glowing red eyes burning with rage. "Retreat? From humans?" Yaxtor hesitated. He knew the punishment for cowardice in the Cipher military. But even he, a warrior who had seen countless battles, could feel it. This was different. This wasn't just another war. This was something else. A nightmare, a horror beyond understanding. The humans had created a weapon that defied logic. Exorvath turned back to the battlefield, watching as another living bullet pierced through a warship, burrowing deep into its core. A few seconds later, the ship erupted into flames, splitting apart like fragile glass. The bullets weren't just destroying ships. They were learning. They were adapting. They moved differently now, faster, more precise, more efficient. The Cipher's greatest technology meant nothing. Their defenses, useless. Their weapons, ineffective. Their numbers, meaningless. Orvath. Claws tightened. Humans should not have this kind of power. He turned to his communication officers. "Find out what those things are." Now. The crew frantically worked, scanning, analyzing, desperate to understand the bullets. The data coming in made no sense. No known material. No visible propulsion. No AI signal. Nothing about them fit into science. One officer, trembling, turned back to the warlord. "Yes, sir, these bullets air." Before he could finish, one of the bullets struck the ship. The impact was silent. No explosion. No alarms. Just stillness. And then, the ship's lights flickered. The walls shook. And then the Cipher soldiers heard it. A whisper. Not from the speakers. Not from the comms. From inside their own minds. "You killed our people. You burned our worlds. Now you will understand." The whisper wasn't one voice. It was thousands. The living bullets weren't just weapons. They were something more. A presence. A force. A consciousness. The command ship's main console went black, and then a single sentence appeared on the screen. "We are awake." For the first time in his life, High Warlord Exorvath felt true fear. Exorvath's breathing was heavy. His claws dug into the armrest of his command chair as he stared at the screen. "We are awake." Those words felt wrong. A weapon shouldn't say that. A bullet shouldn't think. And yet, here it was. For the first time in his long reign as a warlord, Exorvath felt a deep, unfamiliar sensation crawl up his spine, a feeling that his kind never admitted to. Fear. "Shut it down," he growled, his voice betraying a hint of unease. His officers hesitated. "I said shut it down," he bellowed, slamming his fist on the console. One of the engineers, a Cipher technician with trembling hands, frantically pressed a series of commands to purge the system. Nothing happened. The screen remained black. Then the whisper returned. "You think we are a system." The room went cold. The lights flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Then, without warning, the ship's gravity failed. Exorvath and his officers floated into the air, their massive forms helpless against the sudden loss of control. The doors sealed shut. The emergency lights glowed red, casting the room in a haunting, blood-like hue. From the darkness of the screen, a new message appeared. "You destroyed our homes." The ship groaned, metal twisting, as if something inside was shifting, moving, growing. Exorvath struggled, thrashing as he floated weightlessly. This is a trick, a human trick. But deep down, he knew the truth. This was no trick. This was something worse. Another officer screamed as his body twitched violently, as if something was inside him, controlling him. His movements became erratic, unnatural. His eyes turned a solid, glowing white. Then he spoke, but it wasn't his voice. We remember the screams of our children. The possessed officer turned his head at an unnatural angle, bones cracking, as he floated closer to Exorvath. We remember the fires. Exorvath struggled against the nothingness, his massive body thrashing in the zero gravity. You are nothing but weapons. You do not feel. You do not think. The possessed officer's mouth curled into an eerie human-like smile. Not anymore. And then everything changed. The ship's hull began to dissolve. Not break. Not explode. Dissolve. Like something was consuming it, devouring the metal at an atomic level. Exorvath watched in horror as the walls of his worship turned to dust, revealing the vast emptiness of space. Yet, there was no vacuum, no suffocation, no death. Instead, he and his officers floated in the nothingness, completely exposed, yet somehow alive. Then he saw them, the living bullets, no longer just projectiles, no longer just weapons. They were something else now. They hovered in the air around him, small, metallic, their surfaces shimmering like liquid silver. They pulsed, like they were breathing. Then, one by one, they began to reshape, stretching, morphing, changing, taking the form of something Exorvath feared more than anything. Humans, dozens of them, floating in the darkness, their eyes glowing like dying stars. Then one of them spoke, a voice not mechanical, not synthetic, but real. We were weapons. Another stepped forward, its eyes locked onto Exorvath. Now we are something more. Exorvath couldn't move. He couldn't breathe. And then, for the first time in his life, the High Warlord of the Sci-fi Empire did something no one had ever seen him do. He begged. Exorvath had seen countless battles. He had conquered planets, burned civilizations, and crushed enemies beneath his iron will. Yet, here he was, helpless, floating in the void, surrounded by things that were no longer just weapons. They stood before him, humanoid in shape, but undeniably alien. Their metallic bodies shimmered like liquid metal, pulsing with an eerie, unnatural glow. He had always thought of humans as weak, fragile creatures, good for nothing but conquest. But these were not humans. At least, not anymore. One of them took a step forward, moving without sound in the weightless void. Its face was smooth, featureless, except for the glowing, human-like eyes that bore into him. Your kind called us weapons. The voice was not electronic, not robotic. It was alive, calm, cold, and filled with something Exorvath had never heard in a machine before. Emotion. But we were never just bullets. Another stepped forward. We were people. Exorvath's mind reeled, his massive hands clenched into fists, claws scraping against his own hardened skin. This wasn't possible. The Typhar had destroyed the human colony. They had erased it from existence. So how? How were these things standing here? A horrible thought crept into his mind. Had they survived? Or had they become something else? He bared his fangs. You are not human. His voice came out more desperate than he intended. You are just remnants, echoes of a dead race. The figures didn't move. Then the tallest of them spoke. You do not understand, Warlord. It raised its arm. Its fingers shifted, morphing into a sleek, spear-like blade. Smooth, seamless, deadly. You didn't kill us. Exorvath felt something deep inside him twist. You changed us. The living bullets surged forward. Exorvath lashed out, swinging a massive fist at the nearest figure, only for his hand to pass through it like it was made of mist. Then, pain. A sharp, unbearable pain burned through his chest. He looked down. A single living bullet had impaled him, thin as a needle, yet heavy as a planet. It didn't just pierce him. It sank into him, dissolving into his body like liquid metal, spreading through his veins like wildfire. Exorvath let out a roar, his body convulsing as his blood turned cold. Then, he saw it. Memories. Not his own. The screams of human children. The fires that consumed their homes. The desperate cries of parents, shielding their young as Typhar soldiers butchered them. Exorvath gasped, his mind shattering under the sheer weight of it. He was there, not as a warlord, but as a victim. He felt the terror, the helplessness, the rage. He saw mothers clutching their children as plasma fire rained down. He felt their last breaths, heard their last prayers. And then, he saw something else. The moment of transformation. The moment their bodies died, but their minds lived on. The bullets had not been programmed. They had been filled with the last, desperate souls of a dying people. Not weapons, survivors. Exorvath's eyes widened in horror. No, this isn't real. He clutched his head, trying to force the visions out. This is a trick. The tallest figure took another step forward. You made us. And now, we will unmake you. The void around him shifted, twisting like a living thing. He could feel his body changing, the living bullet inside him rewriting his very existence. His warships, his empire, none of it mattered anymore. Because the living bullets had decided his fate, and there was no escaping it. Exorvath had never felt fear before. He had crushed rebellions, reduced planets to cinders, and silenced entire civilizations with the might of the Typhar Empire. But now he was falling. Not through space, not through time, but through something deeper. The living bullet inside him was not just a weapon. It was a passenger, and it was taking him somewhere he did not want to go. Flashes of light exploded in his mind. He saw cities burning, not human cities, but his own. Sci-fi warships, torn apart. His people, screaming as their own machines turned against them. His empire, falling. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. And yet he felt it. He felt the heat of the flames, the terror of his soldiers, the silence that came after. The living bullets were showing him something. Not just memories. A future. This is what comes next, warlord. The voice echoed through his skull. Calm, certain, final. Exorvath tried to resist. He willed his body to fight back, to break free. But his body was no longer his own. The living bullet had not just pierced him. It was becoming him. His consciousness snapped back to the present. The battlefield was no longer a battlefield. It was a graveyard. The Typhar warships that had once darkened the sky were silent, floating like abandoned husks. His fleet, the mightiest armada the universe had ever seen, was reduced to drifting wreckage. He turned, gasping for breath. And that was when he saw them. The living bullets, standing in the ruins, watching him. Their metallic forms shifted, warping like liquid silver. Do you understand now? Exorvath clenched his fists. No, he growled. This is not over. One of the figures stepped forward. You still believe you are in control. It raised its hand. The space around them rippled. And suddenly, Lord was no longer alone. 1,000 voices whispered in his mind. Not alien voices, human voices. He saw their faces, men, women, children. Their eyes burned with something beyond rage, beyond vengeance. It was something colder, something eternal. You took everything from us. You turned us into weapons. And now, warlord, we will return the favor. Exorvath roared, summoning every ounce of his strength. His body surged with power. He was Cypher. He was a conqueror. He would not be unmade. And then, He felt it, something crackling beneath his skin, a presence, a virus, 1,000 minds twisting into his own. He staggered, clutching his head. No, no, but it was too late. The living bullet had finished its work. He was no longer just Horvath. He was becoming them. A weapon, a soldier, a soul trapped in metal. Just like the humans he had destroyed. For the first time in his life, Horvath understood, not just the power of his enemy, but the depth of his mistake. Because this war, it had never been a war at all. It had been a reckoning. Horvath collapsed to his knees, his breath ragged, his vision swimming in a sea of shifting metal. The transformation had begun. He could feel it. His body no longer obeyed him. His cells no longer belonged to him. The living bullet had not just pierced him. It was rewriting him. The whispers grew louder. We were nothing but numbers to you. Casualties of war. But you didn't kill us, warlord. You made us eternal. Horvath clenched his fists, his fingers digging into the shattered remains of his once mighty warship. He was Cypher. He was a warlord. He would not be undone. But then he saw it. His reflection. Not in a mirror, not in water, but in the living metal of his own changing body. His face, a distorted blend of flesh and liquid steel. His eyes, not his own, but 1,000 human souls staring back at him. He screamed. But the sound that came out was not his voice anymore. It was theirs. Far above, in the silence of space, the remaining Cypher fleet watched in horror. Their warlord, the unbreakable, the unstoppable, was kneeling in defeat, his form warping, his body rejecting itself. Admiral Vrex stood frozen on the bridge of the command ship, his claws gripping the edges of his console. This, he swallowed. This isn't possible. The Cypher Empire had spent centuries perfecting war. They had conquered entire galaxies, turned planets into weapons, eradicated species without a second thought. And yet, one human bullet had brought their greatest warrior to his knees. It wasn't just a weapon. It was vengeance made flesh. The bridge crew stared at their screens in silence, the once mighty Cypher warships motionless, awaiting orders that would never come. Because for the first time in their history, the Cypher had encountered something they could not conquer, something they could not destroy, something that could become them. Admiral, a trembling officer whispered, "What do we do?" Vrex opened his mouth. No words came, because deep down, he already knew the truth. This was not a battle anymore. It was a plague, and it had already begun. Horvath's body was no longer his own. He fought against it, tried to reclaim himself, but the living bullets had learned from their creators. They did not stop. They did not yield. They did not forget. You took everything from us. Now you will understand. The transformation reached his mind. Memories that were not his own flooded in. He saw a mother holding her child as Cypher soldiers burned her city. He saw a pilot screaming as her ship was torn apart. He saw a young boy, too small to fight, clutching the dog tags of his dead father. He felt their pain. He lived their deaths. And now, he would carry them forever. Horvath tried to resist. He tried to be himself. But the living bullets did not simply kill. They did not seek destruction. They sought justice. And in the end, they became their enemies, just as their enemies had become them. Horvath was no longer a warlord. He was a weapon. And the war was just beginning. Darkness, a silence so vast it felt like the entire universe had stopped breathing. And then, a single sound, a heartbeat. Not Horvath's. Not anymore. The transformation was complete. The warlord of the Cypher Empire, the feared conqueror of worlds, was no more. His body stood tall, but it was not his own. His armor, once an unbreakable shell of power, had fused with something far greater. It wasn't armor anymore. It was them. The humans he had slaughtered. The soldiers who had fought and died. The innocent who had burned in the name of his empire. Their rage, their sorrow, their pain. All of it had been absorbed into the living bullets that had pierced him. And now, they were him. Exorvath raised his hand, but it no longer obeyed his will. The fingers flexed, reshaped. Liquid metal shimmered across his form, shifting between the familiar and the unknown. His once reptilian eyes flickered, one moment black voids, the next burning with a deep, furious blue. He spoke, but his voice had changed. 1,000 voices echoed in unison. You called us weak. You called us inferior. Now you will witness the power of the forgotten. The Cipher fleet, still in orbit, watched in stunned horror. Their scanners had already confirmed it. Sorvath was no longer a Cipher. His genetic signature was erased, rewritten into something else, something they had no defense against. Admiral, one of the officers gasped, his mandibles clicking in fear. The warlord he's not himself. Admiral Vrex's claws dug into his command console, his mind racing. This was not how battles were fought. They conquered. They destroyed. Their enemies never came back. And yet, here it was, an enemy that could not die. An enemy that became them. Open fire, Vrex bellowed, panic creeping into his usually calm voice. Kill it before it spreads. The Cipher warships reacted instantly, unleashing a storm of energy blasts, plasma rounds, and high-density antimatter torpedoes. The planet's surface exploded under the bombardment, shockwaves rippling across its broken landscape. But when the dust settled, Exorvath still stood. Or rather, what had once been Exorvath. His body shimmered, the attacks absorbed into his new form. The metal that composed him shifted, reacting to the incoming fire, learning from it. The next barrage never reached him, because his body absorbed the energy before it hit. And then, he fired it back. A single pulse of silver light erupted from his core, traveling faster than the Cipher could react. It hit the nearest warship, an enormous dreadnought, the pride of the fleet. The ship did not explode. It melted. Its hull became liquid, stretching, twisting, reshaping. Vrex watched in horror as his own soldiers screamed, their bodies fusing with the ship, their flesh turning into metal, their voices merging into a single haunting cry. They were becoming like him. The living bullets had not come for revenge. They had come to consume, to change, to erase everything that Cipher had built. Vrex stumbled backward, his mind breaking under the realization. This was not just the end of a war. It was the end of the Cipher Empire. Because the warlord, their greatest weapon, was now something far beyond any weapon they had ever known. And he wasn't fighting alone anymore. He was multiplying. One by one, the warships fell silent. The crews inside screamed as their bodies twisted, reshaped, their very DNA rewritten. The living bullets had won, not by destruction, but by becoming their enemy. And soon, the entire galaxy would follow.